there's nobody's house I'd rather crap. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, man. Have you ever thought about what is the purpose of life? Have you ever asked yourself, what is my purpose in life? I think that's an important question, don't you think? It's an important question to ask because life is amazing. If you're a kid, you know, your purpose in life may be to have ice cream every night after dinner. Or your purpose in life may be to have a nice family or to have a lot of friends. If you're a teenager, your purpose in life may be that, you know, you want to be a social media influencer, because how many know they make a lot of money? When people have all those millions that kind of follow, it's amazing how much money they get and trips they get. So you might be thinking that. Maybe it's to love and be loved. Maybe if you are looking for a purpose in life, it's to be rich. That's what I want to do. I want to be rich. The Dalai Lama says that the purpose of life is to be happy. That's the purpose of life. But I like what Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote. He said these words. He said, the purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, and to have made some difference that you have lived and that you have lived well. I think that's a great definition, don't you think? That it's not about just being happy. It's not just about getting whatever I want, but that God's purpose in life is far bigger than that God desires that we live well and that we make a difference in life, that we make a difference with what we've been given. I don't know about you, but I get sidetracked really easy at times with really the purpose of life. I mean, it's so simple to do because we live in a culture that is constantly trying to get us to think about how you look, what you wear, what you own, what you possess. That really makes your life valuable. It makes your life seem so important. I don't think it's intentional that we get that way, but how many know it is easy to begin to lose focus of really why we are here and why we should make our life count? Because it's so simple to get sidetracked. Life has a way of distracting us from the most important aspect of life, which is purpose. The question is, does God have anything to really say about this issue? Because here we are stepping into Missions Week, and what does God really say about purpose and about that for us? So I want to answer that question. There's a lot of verses I could use, but I just want to focus on one particular verse that I think really speaks to today. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It'll be on the screen. This is what it says. It says, He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? Now, require, we all understand, means expected. But really, require is what somebody in authority asks you to do, and then you have to do it because of their position of authority. It is that place where maybe a boss tells you that you have to get that report done by tomorrow, and it's expected of you to do that. God's saying, this is what's required of you. Notice what it says. But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Now, I like what that says, but I want to take it into the Message, because the Message translation, although there's things I don't like how it's translated here in a greater way for us to dissect it. Listen to what it says. But He has already made it plain how to live, what to do, and what God is looking for in men and women. It is quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. Those are pretty good things, aren't they? I like how it translates. It says to do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in love. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take God seriously. I like what it says because I think what it does is it makes it plain to us. And this is what I want you to focus on just for a few moments that we have together. The phrase that says, do what is fair and just to your neighbor. To do what is fair and just to your neighbor. I think that sums up really what this is all about for missions. It sums up what the purpose of life really is. That's the heart of God. And you know what I love about Trinity is that it's the heart of God in this church to want to make a difference with what you have and to change the world. I love Pastor Arnie and Dana because they have a passion and a heart for lost people, for people that are marginalized, broken, and hurting. And you ought to thank God every day that God has given you these leaders to step in and to begin to take you to the next place. Thank God for what Pastor Jim did, but how many know God wants to do even more building on that? He wants to do more. Man, I wish I could have been here for the installation of Pastor Arnie and Dana with my friend, the superintendent Brett Allen, when he came up and did that. That was a special day. I just got to see the pictures, but I would have loved to have been here because I believe in them and what God is going to do here. And that was a big occasion, but how many know that pales in comparison to Connor's birthday? I mean, come on. That's nothing compared to Connor having a birthday. Now, I know right now Connor's like going, thank you very much for putting all this light on me right now and bringing attention to me. Love you, man. That's what this is all about, is that really what God is wanting from us is to live a life of purpose, to live a life that is meaningful, that makes a difference, and to do what God's heart is. That's why, you know what, I thank God for Convoy of Hope, and this is our 25th anniversary, 25 years of meeting needs, of reaching out. I love that. And by the way, Hal Donaldson sends his appreciation, thanks, and greeting today for your help with meeting the needs of the poor, the suffering, the broken, and the lost. Thank you so much, because it means a lot. Convoy of Hope has made its purpose in trying to bring the gospel. Because how many know, church, there's a huge cry of injustice in the world today. If you talk to people, they will tell you that there are a lot of injustices that are happening around the world, and we ought to do something. You go to a college campus or a high school campus, and they'll talk about injustice. Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And whatever affects one directly affects one indirectly. That all of us are impacted. It may be on the other side of the world, my friend, but that injustice affects us as well. Let me give you an example. Every 30 seconds, a child is aborted somewhere in the world. Every 10 seconds, a child dies from hunger-related diseases. Every 40 seconds, someone commits suicide in the world today. There are 20 to 30 million sex slaves around the world. And do you know that a majority of them are 8 and under? That's an injustice. That impacts all of us. 80% of the world, 80% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. How would you like your income to be reduced to $10 a day? You see, we live in a world that are facing injustices today. Over 10 million children this year will die from a lack of food, nutritious food, or clean water. I don't know about you, but that's an injustice that we can fix, that we can do something about if we would just catch the purpose of life. 1 in 3 in the world, 1 in 3 in the world have no access to clean water. That's an injustice. That's why, friends, we come together, not just to sing some songs, not just to hug each other's necks, not just to hear a nice message, although all of those are great. But we come here to catch the heart of God so that we can get the vision of God and begin to do the things of God to make a difference in the world in which we live. That's why we do it. Convoy has helped over 115 million around the world to the glory of God. In just the 25 years, we've responded to over 379 disasters. Just in 2018, we responded to 39 alone. As you heard, in the Bahamas, Hurricane Dorian hit and went right through the Bahamas. In fact, when we were watching it, it actually paused and moved at less than 1 mile an hour for 2 days. 185 mile an hour winds hit those islands there and caused incredible devastation. 70,000 people today do not have a home to live in. 70,000 people do not have the needed food or clean water in order to drink, because in disasters, one of the things that happens is because of the flooding and because of the surge, it ends up contaminating the water. That's an injustice. Convoy has responded. We've given out almost £1 million worth of emergency supplies since the storm has hit. We've flown in with small planes. We've sent over ships that are now bringing over containers that are filled with emergency supplies, with hygiene kits, with water filtration units, with all the supplies they need because of what's taken place. In fact, our team, when they first arrived, they said there were several things that hit them in the face when they arrived. They said, first of all, the incredible heat and humidity. Because in the Bahamas, you know, that could get really hot and the humidity level is really high. And they said when they got off the plane, they looked around and buildings had been leveled, not just because of the winds, but because of the storm surge that used cars and ships and other things to smash against the buildings to wreck them and destroy them. They said the second thing was that people didn't have shelters, and so they were building these little makeshift things to try to get out from underneath the heat and trying to find food. In fact, people by the hundreds were at the airport just hoping that they could get a seat in order to come to the U.S., to the mainland, in order to have potentially a better life. Most of them will not rebuild. They don't have the money for it or the resources. Said the third thing that hit them was the smell of death. The media has reported somewhere around 70 bodies, someplace around there. Do you know, though, that what they didn't report is there are many bodies that are still laying out in the heat because there's no place to store them, so all they've done is put blankets over them. That's painful. That hurts to hear what's going on. But hope is on the way. We've helped more than 20,000 individuals in 12 communities. We partner with churches and other agencies and other organizations to bring the love of God in a tangible way. Why? Because the purpose of life is to step into what's going on and to do what is fair and just to our neighbor. You still with me so far? Say, man, you get pretty excited, you get pretty intense. I do, because when you see it for yourself. I've stood in Nicaragua where they used to have refugee camps, and they had little children that were behind the fenced area there that were starving, and nobody would do anything because they had fled from El Salvador, and they were in between, and Nicaragua wouldn't take them. Honduras wouldn't take them. El Salvador would not let them back in, and little children were starving on the other side of that fence. And I don't know about you, but when you look in the eyes of starving children, you don't recover well from that. You say, man, this is awful heavy today. Well, I just want you for just a moment to imagine that the world in which we live, that there are people every day that desperately need what we take for granted. And I'm just saying, church, what if we could begin to do what is fair and just and change this world in which we live? We continue to respond to Puerto Rico. We continue to help churches get rebuilt and do block parties. In fact, Convoy just started a response to the border. We've brought almost $1 million worth of supplies. The government has asked us to help churches that are housing people that have crossed the border, and we are providing food and water and Bibles and hygiene kits and other items so that churches can love those that desperately need hope. We can argue all we want about walls and borders and all of that, but that's not the discussion that we need to have right now. It's a crisis that so many are coming over and they have nothing. They're here, so how do we show the love of God in the process? And you know what's happening? People are coming to Christ by the hundreds. We've done it in McAllen, El Paso, right along the border, and in Las Cruces, down in Deming, and we're going all the way across just so that we can break the cycle of poverty and help people's lives experience the love of God. You see, faith promises, what I love about that is that faith promise is not where you sit around and you go, okay, the tithe belongs to the Lord. There's no argument there. 10% of my income goes to provide so that the church can do what God has called the church to. So we take the tithe that belongs to Him and we give it to Him. But faith promises are different. You know why? Because faith promise isn't sitting around and adding up your bills and then looking at your income and saying, I've got this much margin, and so that's how much I'm going to give. No. Faith promise is praying and saying, God, what do I believe for with your help that you can do a miracle and change other people, God, for more? You see, I agree that we're living in a time of injustice. I agree that there are injustices everywhere in the world and that we have to stand up and that people are right. They do have right and all unrighteousness, and that because He lives and came out of that grave, that we will live as well. They have a right to hear that Jesus is a healer, a deliverer, the author of peace, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, and He's coming back one day. They have the right to hear that. They have the right to know that God loves them. I flew to Siberia, actually flew into Mongolia, and then we caught a little jumper plane over into Siberia. We were one of the first Americans that had been in Russia because Russia had been closed, and so I was working with a group of people that were bringing Bibles over into Russia because it had opened up, and we flew into Siberia, into a little town that was so depressed and so impoverished. It was overwhelming. I'll never forget, as we would go down to the local market, when we walk into our grocery stores, they're packed, they're full of all kinds of supplies. When I walked in there, most of the aisles and the shelvings were barren. They had a little bit of food, but they had no meat at all. And I asked somebody, why is that there's no meat at all? And they said, oh, well, we don't know when meat is going to be here, but what they do is that if we get chickens or we get pork or we get beef, that people will begin to spread the word that down at the market that we actually have some meat, and people will come as fast as they can. We walked into the schools, sat down with children. Each of them was given a Bible, and then we shared our faith, and then we let them ask questions. And you know, At that time, MTV was moving into Russia, was taking the country by storm. They had opened they'd opened up their televisions, and they've allowed the MTV music industry to come into Russia. And I'll never forget that when we were sitting there they were asking us questions. Most of the questions, when they heard that I was from California, was, do I know Mickey Mouse? Do I know any famous movie stars or any famous musicians? And what is it like to live there? Is Disneyland really as amazing as it seems? Each night, we'd invite people to come back so we could share Jesus with them. We had a piano, we had a few mics, and we had a community center that seated 750 people. That was all. In the evening, we would have over 2,000 show up. They'd sit up and down the aisles. They'd sit on their laps. They'd stand against the walls. They would try to find any place. And it wasn't just people in the community. It was soldiers and military that were showing up because they wanted to hear this gospel. They had never heard it. In fact, the couple that I was with had been locked in the gulag for about 10 years because of their faith. They were elderly at the time that I met them, but they were full of God. They were full of the love of God. And when we did music and sang, and then I got up to preach, and I gave the message of the love of God and why God sent his son and how much he loved them. I'll never forget when I gave an invitation to know Christ. They could not get to the front. It was like they just piled up against as close as they could get. They were body to body, shoulder to shoulder, tears running down their face, weeping because they'd heard the gospel for the first time. And I'll never forget a little grandmother. As I moved forward, I began to just kind of pray as much as I could for those that had gathered in the front. And I began to lay hands on people, and I put my hands on this babushka, this grandmother, and I began to pray for her, and she grabbed my arm, and then she reached up and grabbed my jacket, and I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. And she pulled me down nose to nose, with tears running down her face in broken English. She said, Mister, don't leave Russia. We have so many kids that don't know this Jesus. Please stay and preach Jesus. The world doesn't know what we know. 3 billion around the world have never heard the name of Jesus one time in their life. But you know what I love about God? God uses ordinary people to change the world. He uses ordinary people like you to change the world. You're like, well, I'm not getting on a plane. I'm not going on. You know what? We all have our call. And we can't all go, but we can send. We can give. Because what the world needs today is hope. They need hope. I went to the Philippines, up into the northern Luzon. I'd gone to a place that they still practice headhunting. And while I was there, God began to do a miraculous work. We had medical missions. We had some dentists, some doctors, and we had some eye doctors as well that were there doing free work on people that needed it desperately. And people walked for 2 days to come and get help. And while they were there, we did a crusade and preached at night. And during the daytime, we fed them, we let them see doctors, and they did work on them to help them in their condition. I went to a little village. They put me in a Jeep. And they said, would you go preach over here, this village? We've been trying to reach people for Christ, but no one's coming. No one's accepting Christ, and would you come? And I'd been praying and fasting, and I was like, God, you got to do a miracle here. And I arrived. It was dark. They had cars that were shining their lights towards where I was going to stand and present Jesus. And they had a guy with a guitar, and he was singing, and people were gathering, and the community was only about 300 people. But they kept trying to reach them, and nobody would accept Christ. That night, God did something special. His presence just settled on that place. And after I preached Jesus to them, I saw an entire village come to Christ in one night. An entire village. You know why? Because the world needs hope. They need what you have every day, what you take for granted every day, not intentionally, not like we're just trying to be that way, but there's so much around us that's trying to steal what life's about, what we have as a mission as Trinity Church, as people of God. We have a mission that we may not be able to get on a horses and say, God, by faith, I'm asking you to do a miracle right now. What if God wants to stretch